The sound of a gavel striking wood echoed through the dusty trading post as the auctioneer's voice rang out across the crowd. Next up, a rusty stove and the girl who comes with it. Jenny Blackwood's heart hammered against her ribs as rough hands pushed her forward onto the makeshift platform. Her father's debts had finally caught up with them both, and now she stood before a sea of leering faces, her dignity stripped away like autumn leaves in a harsh prairie wind. It was 1873 in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming, and Jenny had just turned 19 when her father died, leaving nothing but debt and a dilapidated ranch. The creditors had wasted no time. First, they took the land, then the livestock, and finally they came for her. Being sold alongside a rusted cast iron stove seemed the final humiliation in a life that had offered little kindness. Starting bid is $15 for the lot, the auctioneer shouted, gesturing toward Jenny and the stove beside her. Her cheeks burned with shame as men called out crude remarks. She kept her gaze fixed on the weathered floorboards, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her tears. "I'll take the girl and the stove." The deep voice cut through the noise, silencing the crowd. Jenny's head snapped up, her eyes searching for the speaker. He stood at the back, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the others, his expression betrayed no lecherous intent, just a determined set to his jaw. $20, he continued, stepping forward. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $20 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 25? A heavy silence fell over the crowd. The price was high for a stove that was more rust than iron, and a woman with no particular skills beyond ranching. Going once, going twice. Sold. To the cowboy in the back for $20. The crowd parted as the man strode forward, pulling coins from a leather pouch. Jenny studied him warily. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were practical but well kept, and the gun at his hip appeared to be more tool than weapon. "Name's Kieran Walsh," he said to the auctioneer, not sparing Jenny a glance as he counted out the money. "Got the papers?" The auctioneer nodded, producing a document stating the transfer of property. Kieran signed it with a quick scrawl, then finally turned to face Jenny. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd expected. Jenny nodded stiffly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She hadn't been bound, at least. The creditors had deemed her too resigned to attempt escape. Good. The stove stays. Kieran turned back to the auctioneer. "It's worthless. Consider it payment for wasting my time with this spectacle." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Kieran placed a hand on Jenny's elbow, guiding her away from the platform. His touch was light but firm, and despite her fear, she found herself grateful for the steadying pressure as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Sweetwater Junction, a town barely deserving of the name. It was little more than a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a stagecoach stop and trading post. Jenny had lived her entire life just 10 miles outside of town, on the ranch her father had built from nothing but stubborn determination and hard work. "Where are you taking me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Kieran's pace didn't slow. "To get something to eat first. Then we'll talk." The local dining establishment, optimistically called the Grand Hotel, was little more than a saloon with 3 rooms upstairs for rent. When they entered, the piano player faltered momentarily as heads turned toward them. Jenny felt the weight of curious stares as Kieran led her to a table in the corner, positioning himself so his back was to the wall and he could see the entire room. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. Jenny obeyed, keeping her eyes downcast. A serving girl approached, eyeing Jenny with undisguised curiosity. "2 plates of whatever's hot," Kieran ordered, "and coffee." The girl nodded and disappeared toward the kitchen. "You have a name?" Kieran asked once they were alone. Jenny Blackwood." "Well, Jenny Blackwood, I imagine you're wondering why I bought you." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I assume for the same reason any man buys a woman." A flicker of something, perhaps annoyance, crossed his face. "If that was my intention, I wouldn't have brought you to the busiest establishment in town for a meal first." Before Jenny could respond, the serving girl returned with 2 plates of stew and mugs of coffee. The food smelled better than anything Jenny had eaten in weeks, but she couldn't bring herself to pick up the spoon. "Eat," Kieran said, already digging into his own meal. "It's not charity. You'll need your strength." Hunger finally overcame pride, and Jenny began to eat. The stew was simple beef, potatoes, and carrots in a thick gravy, but at that moment, it tasted like the finest meal in creation. "I need help," Kieran said after they'd eaten in silence for several minutes. "I have a homestead about a day's ride from here. 160 acres under the Homestead Act." Jenny looked up from her bowl, surprise momentarily overriding her fear. The Homestead Act had been offering free land to settlers for over a decade now, but it required 5 years of continuous residence and improvements to the land. "I've been there 3 years," he continued, seeming to read her thoughts. "Built a house, dug a well, planted crops, but it's too much for one person. I need help, and hiring hands costs money I don't have." "So you bought me instead," Jenny said flatly. Kieran set down his spoon. "I bought your contract to save you from men who would have treated you far worse than I intend to. You'll have your own room. You'll work hard, but you'll be fed and clothed. And when the 5 years are up and the land is mine free and clear, you'll be free to go with a fair share of whatever we've managed to save." Jenny stared at him, searching for deceit in his eyes and finding none. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm giving you my word, and out here, that's all any of us really have." He leaned forward. "Look, I know what it's like to lose everything. I wouldn't be here if not for someone who gave me a chance when I needed it most. Consider this your chance." Jenny took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to collect her thoughts. Her options were limited. She could try to run, but to where? With no money and no family, she wouldn't get far. And if the stories she'd heard about life for women on their own in frontier towns were true, her current situation, uncertain as it was, might be the better option. "What exactly would you expect of me?" she asked cautiously. "Cooking, cleaning, helping with the crops and animals." "It's not an easy life, but it's honest work." He paused. "And to be clear, I'm not expecting anything else. You'll be my employee, not anything else." Relief washed over her, though caution kept her from fully believing him. Men said many things to get what they wanted. "Do I have a choice?" Kieran's expression softened slightly. "Everyone has choices, Miss Blackwood. Some are just harder than others." He was right about that, at least. Jenny straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Very well, Mr. Walsh, I accept your terms. Good." Kieran stood, leaving coins on the table for their meal. "We'll need supplies before we head out. You'll need proper clothes and boots for farm work." The next hour passed in a blur as Kieran efficiently led her through the general store, selecting sturdy work dresses, boots, a warm coat, and other necessities. Jenny watched in quiet amazement as he spent more on her basic needs than he had on purchasing her contract. By mid-afternoon, they were mounted on Kieran's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty. Jenny sat behind Kieran, their newly acquired supplies secured in saddlebags and a small pack tied behind the saddle. The close proximity made her uncomfortable, but there was no help for it. Kieran had explained that his wagon had broken an axle on the journey to town, which was why they were forced to share the horse for the journey home. As they left Sweetwater Junction behind, Jenny found herself watching the only home she'd ever known fade into the distance. Despite the uncertainty ahead, a small part of her felt something unexpected hope. Whatever awaited her at Kieran Walsh's homestead, it had to be better than the fate she'd narrowly escaped today. The sun was low on the horizon when Kieran finally broke the silence that had stretched between them for hours. "We'll make camp soon. There's a creek about a mile ahead with good water and shelter." Jenny nodded, though he couldn't see her. Her body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, and the thought of solid ground beneath her feet was welcome. The campsite Kieran chose was sheltered by a stand of cottonwood trees beside a clear, shallow creek. He dismounted first, then offered Jenny his hand to help her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and she had to grab his arm to steady herself. "First time riding that long?" he asked, no judgment in his voice. "Pa always had the wagon," she admitted. "I never learned to ride properly." Kieran nodded. "We'll fix that. You'll need to ride if you're going to help with the livestock." He efficiently set up camp, unrolling bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire he built. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee. It wasn't much of a meal, but Jenny was too tired to care. As darkness fell, the sounds of night creatures filled the air around them. Jenny stared into the fire, wondering what the coming days would bring. Across the flames, Kieran sat cleaning his revolver, his movements practiced and methodical. "May I ask you something, Mr. Walsh?" Jenny ventured. Kieran looked up, his hand still moving over the weapon. "Kieran is fine. And yes, you may. Why didn't you just hire someone? Surely there are men looking for work who would have cost less than buying my contract." Kieran set the revolver aside. "Hired hands don't stay. They work a season, maybe two, then move on when something better comes along. I need someone with a reason to stay, to help see things through until the claim is secured." "And you think I have reason to stay?" "I think you have nowhere else to go," he said bluntly. "And I think you understand what it means to work for something that's yours. Your father's ranch, it wasn't always in debt, was it?" Jenny shook her head. "No. We did well enough until the drought 3 years ago. Then the cattle started dying, and Pa had to take loans to keep things going. When the fever took him last winter." She trailed off, the memory still too raw. "I'm sorry," Kieran said, and he sounded like he meant it. "My father died when I was 16. Different circumstances, but I understand the loss." Jenny studied him across the fire. In the flickering light, the hard lines of his face seemed softer somehow. "What about your mother? Do you have family elsewhere?" A shadow passed over his expression. "No, it's just me now." He stood abruptly. "We should get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow." Jenny watched as he checked on his horse, then settled onto his bedroll, positioning his hat over his face. It was clear the conversation was over. She lay down on her own bedroll, pulling the new blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind: the humiliation of the auction, the unexpected intervention, and now this strange journey with a man she knew nothing about. Had she made the right choice? Was there even a choice to be made? Across the fire, Kieran's breathing had evened out, suggesting he'd fallen asleep. Jenny envied his ability to rest so easily. Perhaps it came from knowing exactly where he stood in the world, something she no longer had. Jenny woke to the smell of coffee. Opening her eyes, she found Kieran already up, tending a small fire with a pot of coffee brewing. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. "Morning," he said, noticing she was awake. "Coffee's almost ready." We should reach the homestead by mid-afternoon if we make good time. Jenny sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles from yesterday's ride. She tried to smooth her tangled hair, acutely aware of how disheveled she must look. Kieran handed her a tin cup of coffee and a piece of hardtack. Not much of a breakfast, I know. We'll have better once we're home. The word home sounded strange to Jenny's ears. The place they were heading wasn't her home, it was his. Yet he spoke as if she belonged there already. They packed up camp efficiently, and soon they were back on the trail. The day grew warmer as they rode, the late May sun climbing higher in the sky. The landscape changed gradually, the flat plains giving way to gently rolling hills dotted with stands of pine and aspen. "That's Thunder Peak," Kieran said, pointing to a distant mountain. "My land sits at its base. Good soil, plenty of water from the snowmelt. The first winter was hard, but each year has been better than the last." Jenny could hear the pride in his voice. "What do you grow?" "Wheat mainly, but also corn, beans, potatoes. I've got a small apple orchard started too, though it'll be a few more years before it produces much. 6 milk cows, 2 dozen chickens, some pigs. It's not much yet, but it will be." His confidence was oddly reassuring. This wasn't a man chasing wild dreams of striking it rich. He was building something real, one day at a time. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat a small meal of jerky and dried apples. Jenny's muscles protested when she dismounted, but she said nothing of her discomfort. If this was to be her life now, she would need to grow accustomed to it. As Kieran had predicted, they crested a rise in the early afternoon to reveal a valley spread out before them. A cabin stood in the center, smoke rising from its chimney. Nearby was a barn, several fenced pastures, and what looked like nearly 20 acres of planted fields stretching toward the foothills of Thunder Peak. "Someone's there," Jenny said, noticing movement near the cabin. "That would be Joseph," Kieran replied. "My neighbor from 2 miles over. He checks on things when I'm away." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached, Jenny could see an elderly man emerge from the cabin. He waved as they drew near, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Thought you'd be back yesterday," Joseph called as they approached. "Got delayed," Kieran answered, dismounting and helping Jenny down. "Joseph, this is Jenny Blackwood. She'll be helping with the place from now on. Jenny, this is Joseph Crane, best neighbor a man could ask for." Joseph's eyes widened slightly as he took in Jenny's presence, but his smile never faltered. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Blackwood. About time this place had a woman's touch." Jenny managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Crane. Everything all right while I was gone?" Kieran asked, leading his horse toward the barn. "Right as rain," Joseph confirmed. "Milked the cows this morning, collected eggs. That new heifer's looking ready to drop her calf any day now." Kieran nodded. "I appreciate it. You staying for supper?" "Not tonight. Martha's expecting me back." Joseph turned to Jenny. "My wife will want to meet you. Perhaps you can come for Sunday dinner soon." "That would be nice," Jenny said, surprised by the invitation. After Joseph departed, Kieran showed Jenny around the homestead. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, 2 rooms downstairs, with a kitchen and living area combined, and a separate bedroom that Kieran explained would be hers. A ladder led to a loft space where he slept. The furniture was simple but well crafted, much of it clearly made by Kieran's own hands. "Bathroom's out back," he said. "I've got a proper outhouse, and there's a wash house with a tub. The creek's dammed up a bit to make a good swimming hole for summer, though it's still too cold this time of year." The tour continued to the barn, chicken coop, smokehouse, and root cellar. By the time they finished, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. "I'll take care of the animals," Kieran said. "Why don't you settle in and see what we've got for supper?" Joseph probably left something. Jenny nodded, grateful for the chance to have a moment alone. She returned to the cabin and found that Joseph had indeed left food, a pot of beans simmering on the back of the stove, and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth. She set about exploring the kitchen, familiarizing herself with where things were kept. By the time Kieran returned, she had the table set and supper ready. They ate in relative silence, both too tired for conversation. After the meal, Kieran showed her where the water barrel was kept and how to work the pump for the kitchen sink. "I'll bring in hot water for you to wash up before bed," he offered. "You must be tired after the journey." Jenny was surprised by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you." True to his word, Kieran heated water and filled a basin for her, then excused himself to tend to final chores outside, giving her privacy. Jenny washed quickly, changing into one of the new nightgowns they'd purchased in town. It felt strange to be wearing new clothes after months of making do with her old, patched garments. When Kieran returned, he carried a small wooden box. "This is for you," he said, placing it on the table. Jenny opened it cautiously to find a key inside. "For your bedroom door," Kieran explained. "I want you to know you're safe here." The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to Jenny's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Kieran nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with her emotion. "We'll start early tomorrow. There's plenty to do." With that, he climbed the ladder to his loft, leaving Jenny to retire to her room. She locked the door, though she wasn't sure if it was out of caution or simply to exercise her newfound agency. The bed was comfortable, the sheets clean, and despite all the uncertainty in her life, Jenny fell asleep almost immediately. The next few weeks established a routine. Jenny woke before dawn to start breakfast while Kieran tended to the morning chores. They worked together through the day, planting, weeding, mending fences, caring for the animals. In the evenings, Jenny prepared supper, and afterward, Kieran often worked on small carpentry projects while she mended clothes or kneaded bread dough for the next day. To her surprise, Kieran was patient with her mistakes and generous with his knowledge. He taught her to ride, starting with gentle lessons on an old mare named Daisy. He showed her how to milk the cows, how to tell when the corn was ready for picking, how to preserve vegetables for the winter ahead. Gradually, Jenny began to feel less like property and more like a partner in the enterprise. Kieran treated her with a respectful distance that, while sometimes formal, was never cold. He was a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was usually worth hearing. One evening in late June, they sat on the porch after supper, watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The day had been hot, but a cool breeze now offered relief. "You're doing well," Kieran said suddenly. "Learning fast." Jenny smiled at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you, I'm trying. Your father taught you ranching, that's clear enough, but you've taken to farming like you were born to it." "My mother kept a garden before she died," Jenny explained. "She taught me about growing things. Said a woman should always know how to feed her family from the earth, even when times are hard." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "She sounds wise." She was. Jenny looked down at her hands, calloused now from weeks of hard work. "I was 12 when we lost her, fever like Pa." "My mother died in childbirth," Kieran said quietly. "My little brother too, father never quite recovered from it." It was the most personal information he'd shared since they'd met. Jenny turned to study his profile in the fading light. "Is that why you left home?" Kieran's jaw tightened. "No. That came later." He stood abruptly. "We should turn in. Tomorrow's market day in Mill Creek. We'll need to leave early." Jenny wanted to ask more but recognized the closed expression on his face. Some doors weren't ready to be opened yet. The following day brought a welcome change of pace. Mill Creek was larger than Sweetwater Junction, with a proper general store, a blacksmith, and even a small church. The town hosted a weekly market where local farmers and ranchers gathered to sell produce and livestock. Kieran loaded the wagon with eggs, butter, and early vegetables from their garden. Jenny had also spent the previous evening baking bread and pies to sell. It would be her first time meeting many of the local residents, and despite herself, she felt nervous. "You don't have to explain anything to anyone," Kieran said as they approached the town, seeming to sense her anxiety. "If anyone asks, you're my business partner helping work the claim." Jenny nodded gratefully. "What about your neighbors? Mr. Crane must have wondered." "Joseph doesn't gossip and Martha follows his lead. They're good people." The market was already bustling when they arrived. Kieran secured a spot for their wagon and helped Jenny set up their goods for display. Within an hour, they'd sold half their produce and all of Jenny's pies. "Your baking's quite the hit," Kieran commented as an elderly woman walked away with the last apple pie, praising it loudly to anyone who would listen. Jenny felt a flush of pride. "My mother's recipe. She always said good butter was the secret. Mrs. Walsh, I didn't know you'd be here today." Jenny turned to see a young woman approaching, pushing a baby carriage. For a moment, she was confused, then realized the woman was addressing her, assuming she was Kieran's wife. Before she could correct the misunderstanding, Kieran stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, this is Miss Blackwood, my business partner. Jenny, this is Sarah Miller. Her husband runs the sawmill." If Mrs. Miller was surprised by the clarification, she hit it well. "Oh, lovely to meet you, Miss Blackwood. Your bread looks wonderful. I'll take 2 loaves, please." As Jenny wrapped the bread, she noticed several other women nearby watching with undisguised curiosity. Word of her presence at Kieran's homestead would spread quickly, she realized. Frontier communities thrived on news, and an unmarried woman living with an unmarried man was certainly noteworthy. Throughout the day, more townspeople approached their wagon, as much to inspect Jenny as to purchase their goods. Most were polite if curious, though Jenny noticed a few disapproving glances from some of the older women. By mid-afternoon, they had sold nearly everything they'd brought and purchased their own supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and a few small luxuries like peppermint sticks and a bottle of vanilla extract. "There's one more stop I want to make," Kieran said as they loaded their purchases. "The bookseller. I thought you might like something to read in the evenings." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Jenny by surprise. "I would, thank you." The bookseller's shop was small but well-stocked. Jenny ran her fingers over the spines of leather-bound volumes, breathing in the comforting smell of paper and ink. It had been months since she'd had the luxury of reading for pleasure. "Choose whatever you like," Kieran said, watching her peruse the shelves. In the end, Jenny selected a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson and a copy of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Kieran added a farming almanac and, to her surprise, a book of fairy tales. "My mother used to read these to me," he explained, seeing her curious look. "I never got to finish them all." It was such an unexpected glimpse of vulnerability that Jenny felt something shift inside her, a softening toward this quiet, serious man who carried memories of fairy tales along with the calluses on his hands. On the wagon ride home, Jenny found herself studying Kieran as he guided the horses. The summer sun had darkened his skin and lightened streaks in his brown hair. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and firm jaw partially hidden by several days' growth of beard. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his face, a steadiness that spoke of a man who knew his own mind. "Is something wrong?" Kieran asked, catching her gaze. Jenny quickly looked away. "No, just thinking about all we need to do when we get back." Kieran nodded, though something in his expression suggested he didn't quite believe her. "The south field needs weeding tomorrow, and that fence on the west pasture won't fix itself." The moment passed, but Jenny found herself increasingly aware of Kieran in the days that followed. She noticed things she hadn't before: the gentleness in his hands when he delivered a calf, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the way he always made sure she had water when working in the hot sun. July brought scorching heat and the constant threat of thunderstorms. They worked from dawn until the worst heat of the day, then took shelter inside before returning to their tasks in the cooler evening hours. On particularly hot days, Kieran would announce that they were taking the afternoon off and suggest a swim in the creek. Jenny had been hesitant the first time, but Kieran showed her a bend in the creek where a deep pool had formed, sheltered by willows. He would leave her there with a towel and soap, promising to stay well away until she called that she was finished. It became a welcome respite from the relentless summer heat. One evening in late July, a violent thunderstorm swept through the valley. Jenny had just finished preparing supper when the sky darkened ominously. Kieran rushed in from checking the animals, his shirt soaked from the sudden downpour. "Storm's going to be a bad one," he said, shaking water from his hat. "The creek's already rising." No sooner had he spoken than a deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, followed by a flash of lightning so bright it illuminated the room despite the lamps. Jenny jumped, startled by the intensity. "Just thunder," Kieran reassured her, moving to close the shutters. "Though I should check," another thunderclap cut him off, and suddenly the cabin was plunged into darkness as something crashed against the roof. "Stay here," Kieran ordered, grabbing a lantern and lighting it quickly. Jenny heard him climb onto the porch and then onto the roof using the ladder they kept against the side of the cabin. Rain pounded against the windows as she waited anxiously. Several minutes later, Kieran returned, soaked to the skin and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "Branch came down on the roof," he explained. "No serious damage, but there's a small leak I'll need to fix tomorrow." He noticed her concerned expression. "It's nothing to worry about." "You're bleeding," Jenny said, moving toward him with a cloth. Kieran touched his forehead, seeming surprised to find blood. "It's just a scratch." Nevertheless, he allowed Jenny to clean the cut as lightning continued to flash outside and rain hammered against the roof. The small leak dripped steadily into a pot Jenny placed beneath it, the ping of water against metal creating a counterpoint to the storm's fury. "You should change into dry clothes," Jenny said when she'd finished tending to his cut. "I'll serve supper." Kieran nodded and climbed to his loft to change. When he returned, his hair was damp but combed, and he wore a clean shirt. They ate by lantern light as the storm raged outside, the usual silence between them somehow more comfortable than tense. After they'd eaten, Kieran surprised her by retrieving the book of fairy tales. "Would you mind reading aloud?" he asked. "It seems a good night for stories." Jenny agreed, and they settled in the main room, Kieran in his chair by the fire and Jenny on the small sofa. She began to read The Snow Queen, her voice soft against the backdrop of the storm. Kieran listened intently, his eyes sometimes on her, sometimes on the fire. It was a strange, intimate moment, the two of them sheltered from the wild elements, connected by the thread of a story. When Jenny's voice grew tired, Kieran took the book and continued where she had left off, his deep voice giving new dimension to the tale. The storm eventually passed, but something had changed between them. In the days that followed, their evening routine expanded to include reading aloud from their books. Sometimes Kieran would share stories of his early days homesteading, the mistakes he'd made, the harsh lessons learned. Gradually, Jenny began to share her own stories, memories of her parents, of growing up on the ranch, of dreams she'd once held for her future. August brought the wheat harvest, backbreaking work that left them both exhausted each night. They were joined by Joseph and two other neighboring farmers in a cooperative effort that moved from farm to farm, harvesting each family's crops in turn. The men worked the fields while the women prepared massive meals to fuel their labor. It was during this time that Jenny met Martha Crane and several other farm wives from the surrounding area. To her relief, they welcomed her warmly, asking for her bread recipe and inviting her to join their quilting circle come winter. "Kieran's a good man," Martha told her one afternoon as they prepared dinner for the harvesting crew. "Keeps to himself mostly, but always the first to help when someone's in need." Jenny nodded. "He's been very kind to me." Martha gave her a knowing look. "Seems to me there might be more than kindness there, dear." Jenny felt her cheeks warm. "It's not like that. We have an arrangement, nothing more." "If you say so," Martha replied, her tone suggesting she believed otherwise. "But I've known that boy 5 years now, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching." The comment stayed with Jenny, causing her to pay closer attention to Kieran's behavior. She began to notice small things: how he always ensured she had the first serving at meals, how he'd fashioned a shelf by her bed for her books, how his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't aware. One evening, as summer began to give way to fall, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. The day had been long but satisfying, the last of the hay stored in the barn for winter. "I've been thinking," Kieran said after a comfortable silence. "The claim will be secure in 2 more years. Once it's official, we could expand, maybe add another 20 acres of wheat, get a few more dairy cows." Jenny turned to look at him. Kieran met her gaze steadily. "I've grown accustomed to having you here, Jenny, more than accustomed." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I know our arrangement was temporary, but I've been hoping. That is, I wondered if you might consider staying permanently." Jenny's heart quickened. "As your business partner, as my wife," Kieran said quietly, "if you were willing." The directness of the proposal caught Jenny off guard. She'd known, somewhere in her heart, that her feelings for Kieran had grown beyond gratitude or friendship, but she hadn't dared hope he might feel the same. "This isn't about convenience," Kieran continued when she didn't immediately respond. "I want to be clear about that. I'm asking because I've come to care for you, Jenny, deeply." Jenny studied his face in the fading light. There was no guile there, only an openness she'd rarely seen from him. "When did you know?" she asked softly. A small smile touched his lips. "I suspected the day I saw you standing at that auction, holding your head high despite everything. I knew for certain the first time I heard you laugh, really laugh, when that old hen chased me across the yard." Jenny remembered the moment, Kieran's dignity in tatters as he fled from the particularly territorial hen, his expression of outraged dignity when he finally escaped. She had laughed until tears came, and after a moment of wounded pride, he had joined her. "I don't need an answer now," Kieran added. "Take all the time you need to think about it." Jenny reached out and took his hand, feeling the strength and calluses that spoke of hard work and determination. "I don't need time," she said. "My answer is yes." The smile that broke across Kieran's face transformed him, erasing the usual reserve and revealing the depth of feeling he typically kept hidden. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. It was Jenny who deepened the kiss, her free hand moving to his cheek, feeling the scratch of his beard against her palm. When they finally parted, both were breathing a little faster, and Kieran's eyes had darkened with emotion. "I should have done that weeks ago," he murmured. Jenny smiled. "We have time to make up for it." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Mill Creek. Martha Crane had insisted on helping Jenny make a proper wedding dress, and Joseph stood as Kieran's best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, witnessed by the neighbors who had gradually become friends over the summer months. That night, returning to the homestead as husband and wife, Jenny felt none of the trepidation she might have expected. Instead, there was only a sense of rightness, of coming home in the truest sense. Kieran carried her across the threshold with a playfulness she was still discovering in him, then set her down gently in the main room, where a fire welcomed them. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a small package from a shelf. Jenny unwrapped it to find a silver locket, simple but beautiful. Inside was a tiny pressed flower columbine, the first wildflower she had picked on the homestead. "You kept it," she whispered, remembering how she'd shown him the delicate purple bloom months ago. "I keep everything precious," Kieran replied, helping her fasten the locket around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the autumn chill outside. Their first night together as husband and wife was a revelation of tenderness and passion that banished any lingering doubts Jenny might have harbored. Kieran was as considerate and attentive in love as he was in all things, his strength tempered always by gentleness. Later, as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom, Jenny traced the line of Kieran's jaw with her fingertip. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she admitted. "After losing the ranch after Pa died, I thought that part of my life was over." Kieran caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Life has a way of surprising us. When I went to Sweetwater that day, I was looking for parts to fix my wagon. Instead, I found you." "And a rusty stove," Jenny reminded him with a smile. Kieran laughed softly. "Best trade I ever made." The seasons turned, and with them, the rhythms of the homestead. Winter brought deep snows that sometimes isolated them for days, but the cabin was warm, their stores were full, and they had each other. Jenny joined Martha's quilting circle, and Kieran spent the coldest days working in the barn, crafting furniture for their home and toys for the children they hoped to have. Spring arrived with new calves, the first blossoms on the apple trees, and news that their family would expand before the year was out. Kieran's joy at learning he would be a father was matched only by his protectiveness, though Jenny gently but firmly insisted on continuing to do her share of the work as long as she was able. By summer's end, their claim was officially recognized. The land was theirs, free and clear 160 acres of good Wyoming soil, the house they had made a home, and the life they had built together. Their daughter, Catherine, was born on a crisp October morning, with Martha Crane serving as midwife. She had Kieran's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to be as thick as her mother's. Kieran held her with tears unashamedly tracking down his face, whispering promises that she would never know the hardships her parents had endured. As Jenny watched them together, she thought of the strange path that had led her here, from the humiliation of being sold alongside a rusty stove to the profound joy of this moment. Life on the frontier was never easy, but it offered rewards that couldn't be measured in gold or acres. By the time Catherine was 2, the homestead had expanded as Kieran had envisioned. They now had 10 dairy cows, a thriving apple orchard, and 40 acres of wheat. Jenny's bread and preserves had become famous in Mill Creek, providing a steady additional income. They had hired 2 young men from town to help with the harvest, paying fair wages and treating them with the respect that Kieran insisted was the foundation of any working relationship. Joseph and Martha Crane became honorary grandparents to Catherine, and later, to the twin boys who joined the family, Joseph and James, named for the neighbor who had become like family, and Jenny's father, who had never had the chance to see his grandchildren. Life wasn't without challenges. There were dry years when the crops struggled, harsh winters when illness swept through the community, and the constant physical demands of frontier life. But through it all, Jenny and Kieran faced each obstacle together, their partnership stronger for every trial weathered. 10 years after the day Kieran had first brought Jenny to the homestead, they stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. The cabin had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and a proper fence now surrounded a garden bursting with vegetables and flowers. "Do you ever regret it?" Jenny asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. Taking a chance on a girl being sold with a rusty stove, Kieran's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a single moment," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I do sometimes wonder what happened to that stove." Jenny laughed, the sound carrying across the yard and causing their children to look up with smiles. "Probably still sitting in that trading post, waiting for someone to see its potential." "Their loss," Kieran murmured. "I got the real treasure." As the sun set behind Thunder Peak, painting the valley in gold and casting long shadows across what was now a prosperous farm, Jenny silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to this place, this man, this life. From the darkest moment of her life had come a joy she could never have imagined, proof that even in the untamed wilderness of Wyoming Territory, love could take root and flourish, as steadfast and enduring as the land itself.